Thank you. So, so we're going to start today in a similar fashion to yesterday. First of all, we're going to do a brief meditation in which we'll make sure that our mind is centered again. You know, some of us might have a little bit of busy morning, certain things happening. Our mind might be a bit kind of agitated or, you know, still pretty relaxed, but it's good to just, first of all, ground our body, ground our mind. I'm going to follow this similar meditation routine that we did yesterday. That's what works for me. Again, if you find something else that works for you, you can also do it for yourself, right? So don't get agitated. Just do whatever works for you. We're going to, first of all, make sure that our body feels right. Then that our mind becomes grounded. We're going to do another round of 21 breathing cycle just to make sure that our mind is centered, that, you know, this mental discussion starts to calm down. Then we're going to briefly think of a precious human rebirth, death and impermanence, and that will lead us to going for refuge and bodhicitta, and that's how we're going to start the day. All right, so to begin with, just make sure that you collect your thoughts, that you gather in a mind that might have been scattered a little bit to a certain degree today, that you collect it back and bring it back into the sphere of the body. And you can become aware of the contact between your body and the chair or the meditation cushion. Earth element coming in contact with another earth element. So just become slightly aware of the obstructiveness. And you can also become aware of the space that your body occupies. And we're going to quickly scan our body from toes up to the crown. And again, as we're going to pay attention to different parts of the body, if you feel any tension, any stiffness, any discomfort, then with your mind, try to soften that place and breathe out all the muscle tightness, all the discomfort. But still, we're making sure that the body is in the right posture. The body is upright. The back is upright, not too rigid. So first of all, turn your attention to your feet, to your toes, ankle, the back of the feet. And if there's any tension, just breathe it out. And shift your focus upwardly. Focus on your legs, your thighs, your shins, the back of the leg. And again, if there is any tension, with an out breath, just release it. And again, move upwards with your mind and make sure that your abdomen is resting comfortably. That your chest is open. And that you allow your breath to flow in a natural pace. That your shoulders are leveled and let them drop and rest comfortably. And shift your focus to the hands and also make sure that they're resting in a comfortable way, not tight, without any tension. And then move up to the face. It's best to allow the tip of the tongue to rest on the upper palate, while the mouth is slightly open, allowing the breathing process to flow through the nose and the mouth at the same time. And focus on the meeting points of the two jaws, the joint. And if there's any tension, and normally there is a bit of tension that is accumulated in the jaws, just smoothen it, relax it, breathe it out. And soften your eyes and the cheeks. And your forehead. Normally there's a lot of tension that is built in the forehead. Worries, concerns, thoughts. So surrender it to gravity and completely relax it. And then shift your focus to the breath and count a round of 21 breaths, breathing out, stopping, breathing in and stopping, while allowing the breathing process to occur in a natural rhythm. Not force it, just let it happen naturally. 21 breaths. And at the beginning of correcting a motivation, at the beginning of the day, think that I've attended precious human rebirth with excellent external circumstances, having spiritual teachers to teach me, having enough time, enough money, everything that I need in order to support my spiritual progress. And internally, I have freedoms and opportunities. I was not born in a state that would have prevented me otherwise from developing my mind. I don't have any strong wrong views. I have an access to like-minded spiritual community. I don't have any debilitating situation, physically or mentally, that would have otherwise prevented me from encountering the Dhamma, encountering teachers, study, reflect, and meditate. I haven't done any severe negative action that would have otherwise disturbed my mind to the degree in which it would have become impossible for me to make a great progress. And not only the Buddha came to this world, but he also gave teachings, and the teachings still remain with us in a lineage that is still studied and practiced. There are still realized beings around me. And great benefactors that support others' spiritual progress. So I have freedoms and opportunities, which come with a great advantage. I can first of all make sure that in my next lifetime, again, I secure a good rebirth, so that again I will have a chance of meeting the Dhamma and continue with this work from one lifetime to the next, pursuing the state of liberation and at the end, the state of enlightenment. And how difficult it is to find such freedoms and opportunities. Thinking of the causes that produce freedoms and opportunities. The very basis for that is guarding pure ethical discipline that abstains from 10 non-virtues. So when we think of how hard it is for us in this life to completely abstain from non-virtues, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, maybe to some degree it's easier, but what about lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, idle chatter? What about malice and covetousness? How hard it is to abstain from these non-virtues. So freedoms and opportunities are hard to find because the fundamental cause for them is hard to be created. And we also need to have supplemented it with the practice of the 6 perfections, such as generosity. And at the end, just before death, to connect it up with a positive, a virtuous state of mind. Making, for example, stainless aspirational prayers. So it is hard to find freedoms and opportunities, but we have found them in this life. We have them. And a life is so brief in that death is certain. It cannot be avoided. There's nowhere that we can travel to avoid death. It will catch up with us at the end. And every moment that passes is bringing us closer and closer to the moment of death. And as such, we don't have a lot of time in this life for study, reflection, and meditation. Considering, first of all, how many years do we still have ahead of us? It's hard to really appreciate that because the time of death is uncertain. Some die young, some reach very old age. There's so many conditions that contribute to death and so few conditions that keep us alive. And the body is so fragile. Just takes a slight condition to accelerate our death. The breathing process can cease for a few minutes and that's it. And at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from the Dharma. Our friends and relatives will be left behind. All the things that we have accumulated throughout our life with great effort, all the things that have sentimental value for us, that hold some meaning, all of those physical things will be left behind. We will proceed to next life empty-handed. Even the body that we cherish so much will be left behind. And the only thing that will continue with us in this journey is our consciousness, karma, the negative and positive habits that we have created since time without beginning and up until now. So have we got any guarantee that in our next lifetime we'd be able to avoid an miserable state of existence? How would it feel like, for example, to be born as an animal? Think about it. Think about how it would be for you to be born, for example, as an animal in the meat industry. How much fear and pain you will have in that state of existence. And there would be no opportunity to listen to Dharma teachings, to use them to reduce the pain and fear, to continue to develop our mind. So what can afford protection from such state of existence? What can afford protection is, first of all, the Buddha, the teacher. He cannot do the work for us, but he gave teachings, the Dhamma, that teach us how to develop true paths and true cessations in our mind stream in order to continue to develop positive states of mind, a better insight into reality, so that we can bit by bit develop a greater insight and eliminate our own ignorance. And there are the Sangha members, particularly those teachers that guide us, give us teachings and advice, point out the path that we can follow in order to avoid future suffering. And at the end, my true refuge would be my state of liberation, my state of Buddhahood. Any positive state of mind that I develop protects me from suffering. True paths, true cessation, they will protect me from suffering. So think I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. But not only for my sake, because all along, all the people that have cared for me, that have been so kind to me, find themselves in a similar situation, having no certainty in the cycles of existence. So also for their sake, I will become Buddha, so that I can lead others along the steps that bring about the state of liberation and the state of Buddha. So with that, we can say the verse for going for refuge. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Supreme Assembly. Like in the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become Buddha for the sake of all. All right, let's start. So I'm wondering if you have any questions, any comments, any particular thing that you wanted to bring up from yesterday's discussion, from today's discussion, from a meditation, anything that is that you would like to ask? People at here and people at home.
I have a question, Venerable Council.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get clear as to what mind is and consciousness is, because I've heard them used almost interchangeably, and I'm just wondering exactly what is how to distinguish between the two within the sort of Buddhist tradition.
So Alan, you're asking what's the differences between mind and consciousness?
Yes, yes.
All right, cool. All right, so there's a section of the teachings that is called, it's called in Tibetan Lorig. In English, we call it mind and awareness. Or sometimes it is called awareness and knowledge, which describes the different functions of consciousness and also the different types of consciousness. Then there is another text that is called Minds and Mental Factors that teaches about different functions of consciousness. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because in that text, we have a variety of words that are used for consciousness. So what are the words that we use? We have mind, consciousness, awareness, cognition. Another word in Tibetan is knower, something that know. We have mentality. And another one, which is quite obscure, is sentient. Sounds quite science fiction, doesn't it? Sentient. Sentient.
Yeah, sounds quite.
Yeah, science fiction.
Science fiction.
Yeah, sentient. So there are different words. Now, when you look at the definitions of those terms, you come to see that actually there are different terms that do have different definitions, but most of them come down to mean the same thing. They have the same meaning at the end. So consciousness is defined as that which is clear and knowing. Now, to understand what is clear and knowing, or clarity and cognition, is really difficult. In a sense that we first of all dealing with something that is not physical, right? Consciousness is not physical. It is something that doesn't have any form and shape and color and so forth. So it makes it harder to realize, but we can also realize it based upon a personal experience, because we all experience consciousness, right? If we just kind of pay attention inwardly and think of I, think of consciousness, we do experience consciousness. So consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. So clarity is understood as that which is non-physical. It is not obstructed, that it doesn't have any contact. But also, you can say that it has an ability to reflect objects. So in that sense, the consciousness is like a mirror. Right? It has an ability to reflect objects. And also, there is knowledge or knowing that comes with consciousness. So it has an ability to know its object. So you can say that not only it has the ability to, it has that luminous or clarity aspect to it, in that it's just like radiance, like rays of light that are shed on a particular object. And because that object is illuminated, then the consciousness can know it. Right? So there is that aspect of illuminating object and also knowing that object. It doesn't mean that each and every consciousness knows an object, but at least it has the potential to know an object. So that's the definition of consciousness. Then when consciousness is classified, we have different types of consciousness. There are different ways of classifying or dividing consciousness. One of them is into mind and mental factors. So this is where we come across the term mind. So mind is a consciousness, and also mental factor is consciousness. There are two types of consciousnesses. So a mind is that which engages an object in general. And mental factor is that which distinguishes different attributes of the object, or it has different function in the process of cognition. So for example, I have Eva sitting in front of me, right? So I have a consciousness that sees Eva, that knows Eva, that understands Eva. And within that consciousness, mind and mental factors operate. So mind is the one that just apprehends the general entity, Eva. And mental factors are those which have different functions in the process of cognition. Like, for example, when we look at some of the 5 omnipresent mental factors, we have that which moves the mind towards Eva, right? So it directs the mind towards Eva. There's the one that comes together, that creates a contact with the object Eva. There's the one that makes a distinction between, this is Eva and this is not Leonie. This is Eva and this is not Wangmo. So there's that sense of discrimination. There are also other mental factors like concentration that can remain single pointed, placed upon this object Eva, right? So each one of those mental factors have its particular function, its particular attribute, but still the mind is that which apprehends the general object. So mind is consciousness, and also mental factor is consciousness, in that they're clear and knowing. They have clarity and they have cognition. So that's in a very specific way. It sounds very technical, doesn't it? But still, we can say that in general, also in the way that we speak about consciousness in English and also in Tibetan, in some contexts, we speak about this is my mind. My mind thinks such and such. I don't think that we normally speak like that, but we do speak about mind, like mind training. So we have, it's easier to speak about mind training. It sounds kind of, it rings better in English rather than saying, let's do some consciousness training, or let's do some consciousness transformation. So in general, when we use the term mind, we use it also in a way that is very similar to consciousness, just in general. Yeah, let's do some mind training. My mind is unhappy now. My mind feels quite rested today. So in that general and loose way, it has the same meaning as consciousness. Does it answer your question, Alan? I think that kind of consciousness is I think that it's not always easy to understand exactly what it is, although we experience consciousness.
Yes, that's a lot better.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So, Venerable Carson.
Yes, Gombo.
That's part of the conversation we had yesterday was what is it exactly that goes from life to life?
Mm.
When we're talking about consciousness and mind, what is it that travels from life to life? And I was trying to talk about how it was the subtle fundamental mind that goes from life to life, but I don't think I explained that very clearly.
All right. So I'm not sure that I can explain it very clearly, but I can try. So, I mean, no, we can all give an explanation according to a level of understanding. So I don't have a very precise understanding of that, but I can try. So first of all, when we have two systems. We have the Sutra system and the Tantric system. Both of them give an explanation of what goes from this lifetime to the next. The Tantric system is the one that speaks about subtle consciousness. The whole discussion of coarse consciousness and subtle consciousness is found within the Sutra tradition, but in terms of making a clear distinction between what separates this lifetime from the next and the process of transformation and transferring from this lifetime to the next, this is a very tantric explanation. So what do we say in the Sutra tradition to begin with? That's the foundation of our discussion. So in the Sutra tradition, we say that what goes from this lifetime to the next is consciousness. What kind of consciousness? Mental consciousness. I mean, it's quite kind of, it would be awkward to think that my eye consciousness goes from this lifetime to the next, or my ear consciousness goes from this lifetime to the next. But what happens to those consciousnesses as we go through the process of dying? Well, bit by bit, those consciousnesses cease to function. They dissolve and they go into potentials. So it's not that they completely go out of existence, they go back to a potential form. And in future lifetime, they can arise again. The mental consciousness is said to be the one that goes from this lifetime to the next. For this reason, when different schools of thought within Buddhist philosophy try to pin down what is the actual person that goes from this lifetime to the next, many of them say that since the consciousness goes from this lifetime to the next, the real person is the mind. The real person is the consciousness, the mental consciousness, because not only it is that which goes from this lifetime to the next, but also in terms of the repository for all our karmic imprints. It is the consciousness that is the repository. So we say that, you've studied about karma, right? So we say that we create actions in this life and we experience the result of those actions in future lifetimes. So if there's a person that creates those actions in this life and there's a person that experiences the results of those actions in future lifetimes, how do you connect those persons from this lifetime to the next? Well, the actual person, many schools of thought say, is the consciousness, the mental consciousness. So it makes sense, right? It's actually quite a nice explanation. But then the Madhyamika school of thought, particularly the Prasangika Madhyamika school of thought, does not agree with that. If we say that the real person is the consciousness, we will have asserted inherent existence. We will have asserted that if you look for something, you can find it. If you look for a person, you will find a person, and the person is the mental consciousness. So if you take that, if you agree with that presentation, the whole philosophy of emptiness of inherent existence completely falls apart. That's not the main reason why the middle way consequence, the Madhyamika Prasangika school does not agree with that. But they say that it's part of the philosophy. If you look for something, they say there's no way that you can find it. What you will come to see is that everything exists as being merely imputed by language and conceptions. If you look for something, you're not going to be able to find it. Just like we started today in our meditation, if we have this appearance in our mind of ourself as existing inherently, independently, in and of ourselves by our own power. But if we try to find this independently existing self, does it exist is it up inside the body and mind? Is it within this package of body and mind? Or is it something that exists apart from the body and mind, different to the body and mind? You're not going to be able to find it in other options, and therefore it doesn't exist at all. So you don't find it. You cannot find it. If you can find a person and say that the real person that goes from this lifetime to the next is the mental consciousness, you have asserted that it exists independently. So, of course, there are many other reasons that they come up with in saying that the person cannot be the consciousness. And I think that Jeff asked a question yesterday with respect to the continuity of consciousness, the stream of consciousness. And part of the arguments that they come up with to say that the consciousness is not the real person is that we have different types of consciousnesses. We have realizing consciousnesses, wrong consciousnesses, main minds, mental factors, sense consciousnesses, mental consciousness. If you then start to look at consciousness in a smaller and smaller scale, it's hard to find, to designate which type of consciousness is the actual person. So you don't find a person also within the consciousness. So that's the sutra presentation. And then just to complete that, so what the middle way consequence school of thought says, they say that, yeah, there is a consciousness that goes from this lifetime to the next. But there's a person that is imputed and depends upon that consciousness. Yeah, labeled. Yeah, there's an I that is labeled and depends upon that consciousness. Projected by language and conception. You know, we think I or me, Kimball, Yaki. No, there's a person that exists as being merely imputed, merely labeled on the basis of body and mind. So that person also goes from this lifetime to the next. Of course, Katsun is, you know, the one that is labeled Katsun does not go from this lifetime to the next. What goes is just the mere I, just me. That goes from this lifetime to the next. It's very hard to understand because the words in English don't make a lot of sense to us, right? What is the mere I? I mean, this is a big question. It's a big question that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of investigation. And I think that it's hard to understand it simply by words because first of all, it requires us to study this Madhyamika philosophy, then to think about it for a long time, and then to start to assess that in a meditation process, to start to see how we exist as being merely imputed. There's nothing that exists independently, objectively, that can be found within the object itself. Graham?
When the body gives up the consciousness, does the Buddhist tradition have a name for where it goes to and travels? And how long does it, it can take some time, years to come back into another place.
It goes to the La La Land.
I just say this because I was watching a documentary last night about infinite network of consciousness agents.
All right.
Which is the universe, the new mathematics is now discovering that the universe around us is full of, they think now, beginning to think that the universe itself is full of consciousness.
Okay.
And I just wonder if they're catching up with Buddhism.
All right. There's, by the way, there's an interesting documentary that I watched a few days ago called Infinite Potential.
That's the one.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, because what you said sounded quite familiar. Yeah, Infinite Potential, I highly recommend that. I think you might be. Yeah, you might be able to find it on YouTube. I got a link to that through the organization that put it together. So if you just Google Infinite Potential, it's about the life story of David Bohm. That was and it's trying to. It's not only speaking about his life story, but also his attempt to connect quantum physics and relativity of Einstein. So it's really fascinating. Yeah, and the Dalai Lama. Yeah, Yeah, and there are a few since short I think interviews or short clips of his owners in that documentary, but it's not like it's not coming from a Buddhist point of view, although of course, yeah, it sounds pretty quite in line with what we know, what we study and think of. But no, anyway, it's really interesting. So according to the middle way, I'll get to your answer in a second. So according to the middle way consequence school of thought, we have a stream of consciousness that goes from this lifetime to the next, and that's the mental consciousness. But also with each and every moment of consciousness, we have a mere I that is imputed and depends upon that consciousness. Just a mere I imputed and depends upon that, and that also goes from this lifetime to the next. That is the person that goes from this lifetime to the next. If you are trying to find something that you can hold on to illustrate what the actual person is, and you said that the person is consciousness, you'll run into problems of asserting inherent existence and all the faults within the assertion of inherent existence. So that's a Sutra school presentation. And they don't necessarily make a distinction between subtle consciousness and cause consciousness. Now, before I answer your question, Graham, then we will look at this at the Tantric tradition. The Tantric tradition then starts to speak of cause consciousnesses and subtle consciousness. And I believe that in your study, you might have covered the stages of dissolution that the consciousness go through in the process of death. That's a Tantric presentation. So according to that presentation, at the end of life, just when the consciousness transfers from this lifetime to the next, it has gone through a process of dissolution and got into the most subtle consciousness that exists in our continuum. And that most subtle consciousness is the consciousness that goes from this lifetime to the next. So it goes into a most subtle form, and the most subtle consciousness that exists in our continuum can become manifest, can become active, or can you can say it can be revealed, can become active only at the time of death, when there's that separation between body and mind. So that goes from this lifetime to the next. And then when you can say that when it appropriates a new body, then the consciousness then goes in the reverse process by which it goes from a subtle form into coarser and coarser levels. So then we connected with grand question. Where does is there an intermediate state? How long does it take for that to happen? Well, that is also, I think, a tantric presentation. You don't hear a lot about it from the sutra perspective, but here we start to, you might have come across this term, the Bado state, the intermediate state. So it is said that when we die in this life and take another rebirth in future lifetimes, there are up to 49 days that you might stay in an intermediate state before taking another rebirth. Each one of those 49 days are divided into 7 weeks. So there are 7 weeks or cycles of 7 days where you're born into an intermediate state, and then you die in that state, and it can occur up to 7 times. It doesn't have to occur up to 7 times. You can spend 1 week in that intermediate state, die in that state, and then immediately after that take another rebirth. Or it can happen even before that. You can stay in that intermediate state for 3 days, for 2 days. It's not very fixed, does it? Is it? Sorry. So it seems that the general presentation says that it's up to 49 days before you take another rebirth. Now, why is it like that? I don't know. It sounds pretty random. It sounds pretty like, you have a set of teachings that you don't have a lot of logical means to work with. It's more like you just accept it like that, in a way that is similar somewhat to karma, in that there are some reasons that we can come up with to understand the process of karma. There are some reasons that we can come up with, but still it requires a lot of faith. You know, it's like, how do we know that, you know, if we experience an unfortunate situation, a suffering situation in this life, it is the result of a negative action that we have done 10 lifetimes ago. We don't know that, do we? And even if someone pointed it out to us, we would take it on face value. You know, just, we have no means, no logical means to really verify that. So I think that the intermediate state teachings are similar to that, in that we have a set of teachings. We can think that, yeah, makes sense. I think that that's correct. It comes from teachers that I trust. It comes from a lineage that I trust. So, you know, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense now, maybe I can think about it on those terms. There was another thing that I wanted to say with respect to the intermediate state. Let me think. Geshe Jamming used to say, you know, Geshe Jamming was one of the previous teachers that was here. He said that maybe you can say that there are up to 49 days that you stay in that state, because the consciousness still needs to find a host, you know, a new body, so to speak. Now, since the body is physical, it might take a consciousness certain time or duration to get to that physical body. I mean, how it actually works, you know, for the consciousness to travel and to find its particular body, there are teachings, for example, this 12 links of dependent arising, but still, I think that there's a certain degree of unknown in that process, at least to me.
Yes, I'm thinking the very subtle mind, when it is in the bottle, it doesn't have an identity anymore. And then we do prayers for these things in the bottle, and we have to give them names to the person who's doing the prayer. So, but how are they connected if this person already become labels?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to know, you know, how are they connected and how it all comes together. I think that there's in the Tibetan tradition, and I think that also in the Chinese tradition, there are quite a lot of practices and rituals that, you know, where people make prayers to the ancestors, do practices for the sake of their ancestors or someone that have died. When you ask questions about it, then, you know, Tibetan lamas say that you're creating merit and dedicating it for the sake of the deceased. So you have one way of affecting that person. Are they aware of the previous identity? Most say that no, or some say that in some situations they might have some recollection of the previous identity. So through that you can affect them, but it is not very precise, not very definite. One thing that I've had a few times from different teachers is that we say prayers for the sake of the deceased. So in thinking that that benefits them, but it also benefits us in the sense that, first of all, we create virtue, we create merit, you know, we engender positive thoughts and positive intentions with respect to others. So that's beneficial. But, and we also create those contacts with them, karmic contacts with them, so that we might be able to meet them again in the future and benefit them. But also, just I think that from looking at it from maybe a sociological or anthropological perspective, if we have something to do when someone that is dear to us dies, you know, the psychological burden is I guess made less heavier. You know, there's something that we can do. We can say prayer. We believe that it affects the cause. So there's something that we can do about it. And when you look at, when I was living in India, at some point I had a couple of Tibetan flatmates, and one of them died all of a sudden. He had an epileptic fit, and he got suffocated and passed away. And for a couple of weeks, you know, my house was full of his Tibetan friends that were doing prayers and rituals all day long. And there was quite a lot of commotion and concern about the details. Everything had to be done in a very precise way in order to make sure that the process of transference from this lifetime to the next would be the best possible way. But sometimes the things that, you know, it's like when you find yourself so busy, being busy with all the details, it takes your mind away from all the sorrow, lamentation, and so forth. So I think that kind of, when you look at all those different practices, grieving practices, probably there are a lot of benefits to not only saying prayers, but just becoming busy, feeling that you're doing something that is worthwhile for the sake of someone that died. I don't know if it answers your question, but just kind of.
I thought, because sometimes it seems like they're able to connect to the person in the Bible.
Yeah.
They call their names out, and you know, that's some practices do that. And I don't know, well, they're supposed to don't know who they are anymore. And,
yeah.
I believe that the consciousness mind, it still get impression from this life. Like if you have, for example, music, rituals, all these things influence that consciousness, and that will help the transfer. Like, well, you know, if that mind's consciousness will be happy, will go in will transfer in a certain way. So that is the influence. It's not necessarily as the personality as you think. It's just, I think, it's the mind consciousness which can be still impressed by whatever rituals or.
Yeah, you can say that. You know, you can say that dying in this life and moving on to the next through that intermediate state, our mind is still, I guess, pretty much affected, or can be pretty much affected by what has recently occurred to us. So particularly if we have created some habits, positive habits, virtuous habits, if we have faith in certain teachers, if we have faith in the Dhamma and so forth, if there's a way of affecting the consciousness and bringing about some positive states of mind, even within that intermediate state, that can affect also the future rebirth. So if you have no further questions, maybe we'll go back to the meditation on emptiness and pick up from the point that we left off yesterday. So any questions, more questions, people here, people at home? All right, let's continue then. So we spoke about those 4 points in the usual meditation on emptiness. First of all, recognizing the object of negation, what we want to negate in our meditation on emptiness, which reminds me, maybe if you allow me, I'll just tell you a personal story about coming up with that sense of self. You know, so when I went for my ordination ceremony in India, I went to see Siddha Rinpoche that lives in a big monastery not far from Dharamsala. And I was in that place for about a week before the ordination ceremony. And a couple of days before the ceremony, I went to the office and asked the guy at the office, you know, what do I need to do? What do I need to bring? What time do I need to be there? And so forth. And he said, oh yeah, just don't worry about it. Just be at the hall in the morning. Nuns will go in at 10. The monks will go in at 11. Just kind of bring your robes and bring a little bit of offering. You know, he was pretty vague about it. I said, okay. And in the day of ordination, I woke up early in the morning because I was kind of pretty panicked about everything, panic and anxious. So, you know, I thought of it'd be good to do a meditation to prepare my mind in a positive way to the process of ordination. So I did that, but still I was pretty anxious. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, I thought of taking my stuff and all the gear and going up to the main hall and just hang out around the main hall to prepare for ordination. So there was a building site. So they tell you that you have to go in this underskirt that monks and nuns wear. and a singlet. Then there's something happening in the ceremony, and then you're allowed to wear the robes. So there was a building site between my room and the main hall. And I thought that if I go just, if I walk around wearing just kind of this underwear and singlet, they're pretty kind of, it's a see-through thing, it's not like really, it's not a thing to do when you kind of hang out in your undies and singlets in a monastery. So I was just wearing my, jeans and a jumper, put all my gear in a bag and went up to the hall. And as I was going up to the hall, I swung by the office, and the guy at the office looks at me and said, "What are you doing here? It's already started." So he said, "Go quickly up to the main hall and kind of join the ordination ceremony." So I went up, and the doors of the main hall were closed. The doors are massive. So I pushed them open. And in front of me was Siddha Rinpoche, the ordination master, with 10 other high-level monastics that participate in the ordination ceremony, and about 100 monks and nuns that were kneeling down on the floor.
What was that time?
Yeah, at that time. And I was opening the door, and then everyone kind of turned their head and looked at me. And no, I was still wearing jeans, so the discipline master came down running, it's a massive hall, came down running and said, "You cannot be here, you cannot be here." And I said, "I came for ordination, And he looks at me and he says, "You cannot get ordained like that." So anyway, at the end, I did become ordained, but I thought of mentioning that just kind of in order to illustrate how you construct that sense of self that appears to your mind, a strong sense of self in extreme situations. And then you start to examine that sense of self and see whether it appears to you in a way that agrees with reality, or whether there is a certain appearance that you come up with. And then you start to see faults in that appearance, right? So if you think about, if I think about the way that I appear to my mind at this point in time, there was this independent sense of self that appeared to my mind, as if there's an essence of me that resides within this body, as if this body is a room, or the mind is a room, and inside that room there is I or me, right? Concrete, permanent, stable, firm sense of self that is completely independent. Right, so that's the first step in our meditation, identifying what is the thing that we want to negate, that independent sense of self. And then we create this vivid appearance, very strong appearance in our mind of that self. And then we state the pervasions, in that if that exists, it either has to exist in this way, or it can exist in that way. This is an exhaustive way of existence. So if there are two options of existing, it can exist either as a singular thing or as multiple things, or it exists as being identical to the body and mind, or distinct from the body and mind. Let's look at those two options and see if we can pin down that sense of self and find it either in the body and mind or outside of the body and mind. If you cannot find it, it means that it doesn't exist at all. That's a meditation process, right? So yesterday we spoke about the first 3 steps: identifying what the object of negation is, constructing that strong sense of self in our mind, and then one part of the mind starting to analyze it. And we spoke about how it cannot, if it exists independently, unrelated to the body and mind, there are faults in that way of existence, because then, as we said, for example, someone can see me walking down to the cafe while the I or the self might be still in my room, because the I and the body are not connected, they're unrelated. Or I say I die. No, I die and I'm born. But if the body and mind are not connected, are unrelated to each other, then I cannot be born and die, because the body is the thing that is born and dies. So there are many faults in that presentation, or in that position, that an independent self exists independently unrelated to the body in an objective way. So this is what we said, what we spoken of yesterday, right? So then when we think about it, when we think about the second option of what about the I, the me, the self existing within the body and mind, this is where it becomes even more difficult. I mean, it doesn't become more difficult. It's more like we have many different reasons that we can use, many arguments that we can use in order to find faults in the position that the I, the me, is found within the body and mind, as if the body is a host and I or me exists within that host. It's something, as we said before, that is labeled, it depends upon the body and mind, but if you look for it within the body and mind, you're not going to be able to find it. So, in the fourth part in the meditation, we want to find faults in the position that says that an independent sense of self, independent I, the one that does not depend upon cause and conditions, the one that is like a unitary phenomenon that cannot be divided, exists within the body or exists within the mind. So we can here kind of check two things. Is it identical to the body or is it identical to the mind? Or is it identical to parts of the body or is it identical to parts of the mind? Identical doesn't mean to say that we're looking at two things and find that they look the same. When I say identical, I mean that are they the same thing? Is the I or me the same thing as the body? Is it one with the body or is it one with the mind? Are they the same thing or are they different? Again, here what we're examining is an independent I, the one that exists in and of itself by its own power, objectively. If it exists, is it the body or is it the mind, right? So when we start to look at it within the body, I think that one very common way of analyzing it, which I believe that many of you have had, is the one that first of all looks at the body and in which we ask ourselves, am I my body? Well, to begin with, just with the language that we use, we say that we use the terms I and mine. This is me and this is my body. We never say I and I body. This is I body, right? We never, if I say, hi, my name is Katsun and this is I body, people will think that I'm speaking a foreign language or I haven't got a good grip of English, right? This is not a correct way of speaking. This is I body. We don't say that, we say this is my body. So just within the languages that we speak, and I believe that it's probably in most other languages, if not all of them, there is a difference between I and mine. This is me and this is my body, which indicates that we don't conflate the body and me, the body and I, but there are different entities, different things. I depends upon the body and the body depends upon I, you can say. So there is a relationship, there is a dependency, but they're not the same thing. But also, if the body is me, if the real I is the body, then again, the whole presentation of past and future lifetimes falls apart. Because you would say that if the real me, the real I, the independently existing I, the one that does not depend upon anything else, is the body, there's no way that past and future lifetimes exist, because when the body dies, the I will die. It will cease to exist. When the body is born, the independently existing I will be born. So there will be only one occurrence of that I throughout our lifetime if the I is the body. Does it make sense?
I wonder if we change the way our expressions, say, take the I out, when when this person introduced this person,
Yeah.
I say, this person is Eva. You can still put a label.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
just say this person, this thing, or maybe this combination of whatever.
Yeah.
These aggregates.
Yeah, these aggregates and mind. The way we think, I'm just thinking we are affected by the way we, the language, the way
Totally.
we talk about things.
Yeah. I mean, we are affected.
Reduce our solid feeling of the art.
Mm. So I totally agree with you that we are affected by the way that we use language. And not only that, we also, because we're, you know, the most immediate thing that we sense and see and feel and so forth in our existence in this life is the body. Then we also identify with certain characteristics of the body. Like, for example, I'm Yaki, I'm a man. No, I'm tall, I'm short, I have a kind of a small belly. I have fair complexion, or so we have certain identity that is based on features of the body. And we also, I think, learn to identify with the body through also the language that we use. I think that probably also, even if we don't necessarily use this language or the other, still, I think that probably innately we identify with the body. But anyway, our language compounds the attitude that we have with respect to ourselves. So if we change the way that we refer to ourselves, I think that it's okay to do it when you're around Buddhists, although it will still be kind of, it will still, at some point, it can also become a bit clunky. But if you go outside, if you go to the shops, to IGA or whatever, and say that this person that is called Eva, or, and you point to yourself, would like to have, 12 dozen eggs and so forth, then people think that you're a bit awkward. But, I mean, having said that, having realized emptiness or selflessness, when you rise from your meditation, you can then realize what is called subtle conventionalities. Now, subtle conventionalities are basically everything that appears to us. So when we look around us at this room, we have so many different phenomena that appear to our mind, that appear to our consciousnesses. They come with certain appearances. Whatever appears to us currently appears as if it exists in and of itself independently. Objectively, it appears as if it is not related to your mind. It is not merely imputed by your mind. It still appears as if it exists completely by itself, in and of itself, independently. So, having realized emptiness, having realized it perceptually, you arise from your meditation and still things appear to you in the same way, as if they exist in and of themselves. But you know that you have just meditated on emptiness, and this is not true. They do not exist in the way that they appear to you. They appear to exist independently, but they do not exist in that way. They are like illusions. So the realization that they are like illusions is what occurs after your meditation on emptiness. So then when we refer to ourselves, then, for example, we have a sense of self, and when we think of ourselves, normally what appears to our mind is our body. Right? So now if you think of me, or if you think about your mother, for example, now if you think about your mother, and this is also a nice exercise to do. If you think about any person that you know, can they appear to your mind without the body appearing to your mind? Yes. So do you think of your mother, for example, or someone else without the...
I don't think of her body, I just think of my mom, just as a whole.
As a whole. Well, whenever I think of my mom or someone else, like if I think of my mom, for example, either the voice of my mom appears to my mind, or kind of a rough shape of my mind, or something that is connected to my mom. It seems that there's never just an appearance of mom in my mind that is that appears without depending on something else appearing to my mind. Yeah, there's something blurry that appears to your mind. Anyway, why am I speaking about it? Why did I go on that tangent? So after you realize emptiness, perceptually, you rise from your meditation and you know that everything is like an illusion, in that it appears in one way, it appears in one way, but it doesn't exist in that way. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all. It means that you realize that there's a discrepancy between how it appears and how it exists in reality. So also that's with respect to yourself. So you think, for example, I'm Eva, or I'm Katsun. So I'm the person that is only imputed in depends upon this. I'm not found within this body. I or me is not the body. It is also not found within the body. If I look for it, I'm not going to be able to find it. I'm just imputed, I'm just labeled, it depends upon this thing. And also it depends upon my mind. So, we spoke about looking for the I within the body. So first of all, the I is not the body. What about being able to find the I or the self within the body? That's also pretty, I think that kind of many of you probably have had or have done this meditation before, where you start with your mind to analyze the body, to dissect the body, to break it into different parts. We recently covered a few nice verses in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, when he speaks about reducing our sense of attachment to the body without eliminating or destroying the sense of attachment that we have to the body. Shantideva says that it'd be really difficult to maintain pure ethical discipline. So he says, look at the body and try to see if there's any essence of yourself or any essence that is really enchanting within this body. So with your mind, take a knife, a scalpel, and cut your body into different pieces. So check out what's happening beneath the skin, in the flesh, in the bones, in the tendons. Can you find anything that is you, yourself, the I or me, that sense of I that appears to our mind, that is found within the different organs of the body? So I believe that you've heard about this meditation before. Have you heard about it? Right, trying to break the body into parts, asking yourself, am I my head? Am I the heart? Am I the bones? Am I the arms? Am I the legs? If there's any part of the body that I can find me within this part of the body. So that's a common meditation. Another one that I wanted to introduce and maybe also check it out in our next session is to meditate on the elements, which is a different approach to the body from a Buddhist perspective, and I think that also Asian perspective in general. So in Buddhism, and I think that that's probably also coming from Asia in general, there's a lot of discussion of the elements, right? The earth element, water element, fire element, and wind element. And it says that our body is made of the elements. For people that are not used to that system, it sometimes sounds pretty abstract, pretty vague. But it's still, I find that it's a really interesting and useful meditation to do. In that, when we say that our body is made of elements, it's a different way of looking at different aspects of the body. So we have the earth element, which is you could say the hard tissues in our body, like bones. The hard thing, the obstructive things within the body are attributed to the earth element. So that which is hard and solid, any solidity, anything that is hard is the earth element. Then we have the water element, which is the moisture, the fluids in our body, blood, urine, what have you, that is attributed to the water element, right? That which is wet and moist. Then we have the fire element, that which is hot. It says kind of the definition of the fire element is that which is hot and burning. But we can speak about the heat in our body, different places that have different degrees of heat is the fire element. And then there is the wind element, the movement of different things in the body. So sometimes you feel kind of different tingling sensations in the body. Also, we have the movement of air, breathing in and breathing out, the movement of blood or other things within our body. So when you think of the body as being made of the 4 elements, then you start to pay attention to different sensations, different things that occur within your body. First of all, that sensation of solidity, sensation of moist, sensation of heat, and also the movement, the tingling movements in the body. And the body is made by all of them. Right? It's a combo of all of them. So then in a meditation of mindfulness of the body, for example, you become aware of those different sensations attributed to each one of the elements. And then you ask yourself, do I find I or me within any one of those elements? The body is made of the elements, but am I the earth element? Am I the water element? Am I the fire element? Am I the wind element? The body is made of them, but the body is not, the I, the me, is not found within each one of those elements. So, since our time is almost up for this session, so we'll practice this meditation in the next session. But altogether, I wanted to introduce this meditation as part of the last part in the meditation of emptiness, in which you try to find I or me within the body and mind. All right, so if you don't find the I or me within the body or within the mind, and you've already negated the possibility of I or me existing outside in a way that is unrelated to the body and mind, there's no other way there's no other place or state in which that independent sense of self can exist, and therefore you can completely negate its existence. All right, let's have coffee. Yeah. It's heating up, isn't it? Yeah, summertime is almost here.
Carlson?
Yeah.
Tim here. Hello. Just a question. With those 2 meditations you just mentioned, is there one they do with this finding the I used with the aggregates? So, as of form and feeling and all that sort of stuff. Is there something they do in regards to that as well?
Yeah, and I'll say a few words about it at the beginning of the next session.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Cool. No worries. No worries. Thanks, Tim. In the session or in recording?
Yeah, no, just in recording, and then you can turn the video off so if you like.